Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am sharing two cards that feature the same press plate, but we're going to think a little bit outside of the box for each of these cards and use the products in a little bit different way than they may have been intended. So the products I'm using today are brand new from Pinkfresh Studio. They're called Keepsakes of the Heart, and this product suite includes a stamp set as well as a coordinating press plate. So if you don't have a better press system or a glimmer hot foil system, you could use the stamp set to create these cards instead. And you'll see on the die set that it includes some additional dies, but the images for those dies are not in the stamp set. Instead, those images are created with the coordinating stencil set. So it creates these bottles for these little stems to kind of stick in. Now I'm going to be using the Glimmer Hot Foil system with the press plates today. Keep in mind, press plates are always compatible with both your hot foil system as well as your better press system. And I just decided that I wanted to do something with some shine today. So I opted for some hot foiling. It is one of my favorite card making techniques. And if you haven't done it yet, I share a lot of videos on hot foiling here. It is a very easy technique. It takes some practice at first, but once you get it down, it is totally addictive. Now for my most used foils, I like to trim them down into card size panels and store them in a stamp pocket. And that way, when I'm ready to hot foil, I already have panels created. Now, if I need to trim one of these panels down, I can. Now, once the platform is ready, that green light will come on, and then I can hit the timer button, and you'll see that second green light flashing. Once the timer has completed, that green light will stop flashing and become solid, and then I can remove the platform from the base and take it over to my Platinum 6 die cutting machine. I'm going to add my hot foil with the pretty side facing the pattern of the press plates, and then I'm going to add some Concord and Ninth white cardstock on top. And to complete the sandwich, I'll add the thin shim and the spacer pad that come with the Glimmer Hot Foil system, and then run that through my die cutting machine. Once I've run it through my die cutting machine, I can dock the platform back into the base, and then I can peel up the foil to reveal my perfectly foiled images beneath. And this is champagne foil from Spellbinders, and it is my favorite gold foil. I did have a couple areas where it looked like it overfoiled, but I was able to knock them off with my finger, so it wasn't a true overfoil with the foil kind of stuck to the cardstock. If you have instances of overfoiling where the foil is actually stuck to the cardstock, I find a sand eraser is very helpful in removing that. Now I'm trimming down this panel just to make the stenciling process a little bit easier. And for stencils 1 and 2, those stencils are going to create the bottles, so I'm going to set those aside for just a moment while I stencil my stems here. I'm starting out with stencil number 3 and lining that up. I'm using a grip mat to hold my cardstock and my stencils in place as I add my color. And on this stencil number 3, the buds are included on that kind of floral piece. So I'm just using some Post-it tape to cover up those little buds on the end of that stem so that I don't get green ink into the buds. Now that those temporary masks are in place, I can go ahead and blend over the entire area with Sage ink. I'm using the 1-inch blending brushes from Pinkfresh Studio. These are fabulous blending brushes, and I'm making some lighter and darker areas, but I'm not thinking about it too much. I'm just quickly adding some light and dark areas. Then I can reposition that Post-it tape to expose the little buds, and I'm going to blend with Peony over these areas. I'm adding more ink towards the base of the bud and allowing it to kind of fade out as it gets to the tip. I like to wipe up my stencils before I remove them just so I'm not getting ink on my fingers, and then I'm moving on to stencil number 4. This is a simple stencil, and I just use begonia for that. On stencil number 5, it creates more of the greenery, and I am bringing in some olive ink for that. And you can see these areas are much smaller, so I've switched over to a 1/2-inch blending brush instead of the larger blending brush. For the final stencil, it adds some details onto that greenery, and I'm using Lush Forest. It's one of my favorite greens from the Pinkfresh Studio families. And now that I have all of my stenciling done, I can remove that from the grip mat and move on to my bottles. Now for the bottles, I'm actually stenciling directly onto a panel that is A2 size, so 4¼ by 5½. And I am lining up the stencil using the registration guides in the corner of the stencil. They're kind of etched in there. I want to make all 3 of my bottles a different color, so I'm using the other stencils in the set to kind of create some temporary masks so that I can just kind of shield the other bottles around the one that I'm working on, and that way I'm not mixing my colors. I'll reposition those for each bottle, and then I am blending on my colors. I use Cherry Blossom, Mint, and Peach Fuzz for these bottles. Now, the first way that I kind of thought outside the box on these projects, and it's not mind-blowing, but it's very simple. I looked at these stencils and I thought, you know what? I'm going to create no design on the bottles. So there's kind of these embedded floral designs on the center of the bottle. And instead of blending over the entire area on this final stencil for the bottles, or stencil number 2 in the set, I'm using a smaller blending brush, and I'm only blending on like the shadow pieces on the outside of the bottle. So I'm not blending over the floral pieces in the middle. I did that with all of the bottles. And so you can see I have the shading, but I don't have the floral details. And so that's one way you can kind of change up your card projects, is look at your stencils and see if there's something you can either add or omit to change the look of something. Now it's time to die cut all of my images. So I'm starting out with the bottles. It is a 1-piece die in the set that cuts out all of the bottles as well as the little corks. And I wanted to show you that this stencil actually creates a little bit of bleed on the edge so that if you don't get your die lined up perfectly, you're still okay. Your images will still be perfect. Once that was die cut, I used the 1-piece die in the set to die cut the stems that I have stenciled, and these turned out absolutely beautiful. I love the combination of the sage, the lush forest, and the olive together. Now that all of my stems are created, I'm going to use some new Pinkfresh Studio glue, and I'm going to glue these to the bottle. So for this first one, I'm holding it in place and then just kind of sneaking the tip of my glue bottle behind that. I am going to use my reverse grip tweezers from Pinkfresh Studio to hold that in place as the glue dries. Now for this second bottle, I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid glue to that stem and then position it where I want it. Again, I'm just going to allow that to dry there on my work surface. And then finally, I'm going to move to the Peach Fuzz bottle. Again, using that liquid glue, and then I'm going to grab the cross-lock tweezers and place them towards the top of that bottle to make sure everything's making good contact as that glue dries. Now that all of my stems are in place, I'm going to arrange my bottles here on the work surface, and I'm going to use some Post-it tape to hold all of those bottles together because I have an arrangement that I like and I don't want to mess it up. So I'm just kind of making sure everything's perfect. I'll grab some Post-it tape and just kind of secure them all together. And that will allow me to kind of work with these as one element rather than 3 separate elements. So before I adhere these onto my card front, I am going to create a little diagonal detail on my card front. So I'm positioning my cardstock in my trimmer at an angle. And then I'm going to use some tape runner adhesive and adhere it to a panel of white cardstock that measures 4¼ by 5½ inches. So that's the same size as an A2 size card. I'm just using my work surface to make sure everything lines up. And once I have that in place, I'm going to use the brand new stitched rectangle dies. These are a single stitch rectangle die to die cut this panel down just slightly so it's a little smaller than my A2 size card front. You can see this gives this rectangle a nice little stitch detail around the border, and now I have that angled piece at the bottom. And everything has the stitching because I adhered the panel of gray cardstock to the bottom of that white cardstock before I die cut it. Now I'm taking my bottles and I'm flipping them over and adding some foam adhesive to the back. And this is where I decided I wanted a little bit of pattern on that gray cardstock, but I don't want it to overlap onto my white cardstock. So I'm just using some scrap paper that's in my craft room and I'm masking off the top portion of my card front. I flipped it over and used some Post-it tape on the back to hold this computer paper in place. And now I'm trimming off the excess so that I can place this in my Misty stamping tool. And I'm going to use the brand new Garden Medley stamp. This is a cling stamp to stamp some pattern on the bottom of my card front. So I have that in my Misty stamping tool, and I'm going to position my cling stamp right over my card panel. I'll pick up my stamp with the lid of my Misty, and then I noticed this was kind of wiggling around, and so I grabbed another scrap of Post-it tape and just held it in the bottom of my Misty stamping tool. Now, something I do want to point out is that when you're using these cling rubber stamps with your Misty stamping tool, you're going to want to remove either the foam pad that's in there or your grip mat, whatever you use inside of your Misty stamping tool. You'll remove that to use these cling rubber stamps. And you can see I stamped that in Misty Coast ink for a tone-on-tone effect. Now I'm removing the backer of the foam adhesive on the backs of my bottles, and I'm positioning this arrangement onto my card front. I have my cross lock or my reverse grip tweezers here to kind of keep my fingers out of the way and make sure I get everything where I want it. I'm finishing off my card by adding some iridescent clear drops from Pinkfresh Studio. I'm adding them with some liquid glue, and I'm using the dual tip embellishment tool from Pinkfresh Studio to position those on the card front. For my sentiment, it is one of the foiled sentiments that I created earlier along with those stems. I did stack a couple layers of plain white cardstock behind the sentiment to give it a little dimension, and then I adhered it onto my bottles using some liquid glue. And I'll attach this entire card front onto a eucalyptus card base using a panel of foam adhesive. And that finishes off card number 1, featuring this brand new Keepsakes of the Heart product suite from Pinkfresh Studio. Now, sometimes when I'm creating something as it's intended, which this is kind of a card that demonstrates how this product suite was intended, sometimes I'm inspired to create something that's a little bit different. And so I went ahead and foiled about 4 of these stem sets and die cut them out. Now, I'm not using the stencils on these at all. Instead, I am going to create a pattern. So instead of using these along with the stencils and the bottles, I decided these would make a really cool botanical pattern on this eucalyptus cardstock. So once I have all of my elements die cut out, I am just positioning them onto this A2 size card base. I'm creating my arrangement, and once I feel like I'm happy with my arrangement, I am going to start picking up each of these stems one by one and adding them on with liquid glue. Now, to add some dimension, you could add these on with some foam adhesive instead, but these are pretty intricate pieces and I didn't want to fuss with that today. So I'm going to find another way to add some dimension to this card in just a bit. For now, I'm just going to pick up each of these, add some liquid glue on the back, and then hold them in place with that strong magnet there as they dry. That's just a little insurance policy for me to make sure that I don't knock anything off after I've placed the glue on the back. So I worked my way around, and once I had all of my stems attached to my card front, I went ahead and snipped off the excess using my favorite scissors. These are from Spellbinders, and let me tell you, they are worth every penny. I have purchased them all on my own, and I absolutely love them. Now, I did want some dimension on this card, and so I am taking the 2 largest dies from that brand new Essential Stitched Rectangles die set from Pinkfresh Studio. I'm nestling them together and holding them together with some Best Ever craft tape, and I am creating a stitched rectangle frame for the front of my card. I die cut it from some gray cardstock, and then I die cut it 2 more times from some plain white cardstock, making sure that I left those dies connected together so that I had the same exact shape for all 3 of these frames. Then I'm going to stack up the frames. I'm adding some liquid glue to the front side of that first white frame and just positioning the second white frame directly on top. I'm using my fingers to make sure that everything's lined up, and then I put a heavy acrylic block on that to give it a little bit of time to dry. Then I flipped over that gray frame, added some liquid glue to the back of that, and I positioned that directly on top of those stacked up white frames. This is going to give a little bit of dimension around the outside of the card, and it kind of just gives a finishing touch to this card. Now, I think it's beautiful as it is, and I think you could totally get away with no frame, but I thought the frame was a fun touch. Now, I also used some double stitch circles from Pinkfresh Studio, and I die cut a vellum circle, and I added another stem along with a sentiment there with some foam adhesive, and I added that vellum circle to the center of the card, and finished my card off with some champagne glitter drops from Pinkfresh Studio. And I love how this turned out. Now, these stems weren't necessarily meant to build a pattern, but I love the botanical feel of that second card so much. So you can see I've used the same product suite here. I've thought outside the box a little bit for each of these cards to create something that maybe wasn't intended when the creator created this product suite, but it's fun to look at your products in different ways. And I encourage you, next time you get some new products in your hands, to look at them and see what you can do to make them just a little bit different. I think you'll have a great time creating with your products and stretching them a little bit further. Now, as always, I will have links to the featured products used in these projects in the description at YouTube. So if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there, or you can head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, a complete list of supplies, as well as some information on a blog hop that's happening today to celebrate this brand new Sunshine and Smiles release from Pinkfresh Studio. There's lots of inspiration and prizes to be had, so be sure you visit me over there. As always, I want to say thanks so much for stopping by and hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed these projects, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here so you don't miss any of my paper crafting, card making video tutorials, as well as my Carissa Crafts live stream broadcasts. Thanks again for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.